was 4:40 a.m. on October 6, 2025, when a shadow settled over the occupied Crimean port of Feodosia. On the deck of a 900-foot Russian supertanker, a deckhand adjusted a mooring line, unaware that he stood at the center of a billion-dollar trap. Hundreds of kilometers away, deep inside a Ukrainian bunker, a drone operator watched his every move through a thermal screen, not as a spectator, but as the conductor of an operation months in the making. Could a single drone strike rewrite the logistics map of the Black Sea? The tanker was supposed to be untouchable. Protected by an Admiral Grigorovich-class frigate radar systems spanning over 200 kilometers and a Pantsir S-1 air defense battery, Russian commanders were certain that this fuel lifeline to Crimea could not be breached. Yet, as analysts at Defense News later noted, these defenses were optimized for missiles and aircraft, not for the silent, low-flying, AI-guided drones Ukraine had begun deploying in recent months. Western officials compared the setup to a medieval fortress built to resist arrows while ignoring the invention of gunpowder. Ukraine's intelligence network had obtained the tanker's precise refueling schedule weeks in advance. According to reports from BBC Ukraine and Reuters, reconnaissance drones using Starlink-secured connections had tailed the vessel for more than 700 kilometers, feeding coordinates in real time. What no one outside Kyiv knew was that Ukraine had been experimenting with a new swarm coordination AI system, known internally as VelisNet 2.0, trained on NATO algorithmic warfare simulations. The plan hinged on physics as much as strategy. Instead of fighting the strong headwinds sweeping across the Black Sea that night, the Ukrainian swarm used them crawling low against the gusts, keeping their radar profile nearly invisible. They turned wind into armor, a U.S. Air Force analyst told The Guardian, emphasizing how Ukraine's tactical evolution had shifted from brute force to precision mathematics. When the tanker finally docked at Feodosia, the Ukrainians waited. They allowed Russia's own procedures to complete docking cables, secured pumps, engaged the ship's massive hull, positioned directly between the radar arrays and the open sea. What was designed as protection became the perfect blind spot. The tanker's metal frame now masked everything behind it, including the incoming attack. For Kyiv's planners, this was more than a strike. It was a symbolic duel. By hitting Feodosia, they targeted the heart of Russia's supply chain to the southern front. Destroying this hub would be like draining the bloodstream of Moscow's occupation forces, noted DW's Eastern Europe correspondent. Economic analysts estimated that the terminal supplied over 50% of all military fuel in Crimea, a staggering dependency for a nation already strained by Western sanctions. Yet even as the first decoy drones were armed, one question lingered. Would Russia's layered defenses detect the real threat before it was too late? As midnight deepened, the first phase began. Dozens of Lelika 100 decoys launched from a concealed coastal site, their engines roaring like a storm of angry hornets. On radar, they appeared as a swarm of deadly threats. Russian operators reacted instantly, radar screens flooded with red alerts, the Pantsir batteries lighting up the night sky. But the spectacle above was only a distraction. Below the radar horizon, hidden by the tanker's 900-foot bulk, the real strike force advanced silently at 80 knots, Velis-linked drones hugging the sea surface, invisible to Russian sensors. Western observers later compared the operation to a chess grandmaster sacrificing a queen to deliver checkmate with a pawn. By 1:41 a.m., the board was set. The Russians believed they were winning, while the Ukrainians watched calmly from the bunker, every heartbeat synchronized with the drone's telemetry feed. The world had not yet seen the opening move of what would soon become the most devastating energy strike of the Black Sea War. And as the decoy explosions painted the sky over Feodosia in flashes of orange, a quiet question echoed in Kyiv's command center. Would this night mark the moment when technology finally outsmarted fortress warfare, or would the wind itself betray them? By 1:42 a.m., Feodosia's night sky looked like a fireworks show. The Panzer S-1 batteries barked streaks of white fire, vaporizing decoy drones one after another. Russian operators congratulated themselves, convinced they had repelled the attack. But in reality, they were firing into an illusion. Beneath the radar horizon, the true swarm, 35 low-profile attack drones, crept silently through the sea air at just 15 meters above the surface, their thermal signatures drowned by the tanker's massive heat bloom. The operation's genius lay in the physics of invisibility. Western analysts, including those at Jane's Defense Weekly, later described this phase as a masterclass in radar manipulation. The tanker's enormous steel body, still pumping fuel, acted as both shield and mirror-bending radar waves away from the oncoming drones. Ukraine's planners understood the principles of radar occlusion better than most lessons shared quietly through NATO-linked simulation exercises. One retired U.S. Navy radar officer told Al Jazeera they weaponized reflection itself. The Russians couldn't see what was literally behind their own ship. Inside the Ukrainian command bunker, operators maintained radio silence. The only sounds were the soft hum of processors and the faint whine of propellers across 1,000 kilometers of encrypted Starlink bandwidth. The attack pattern unfolding on their screens was a ballet of data and timing. According to Defense News, Ukraine's drones weren't acting as individual machines. They were functioning as a single adaptive organism linked through real-time telemetry and powered by micro-AI decision units designed in cooperation with Western software engineers. Every movement had purpose. The decoy swarm kept Russian radars spinning skyward, while the strike drones advanced underneath, recalculating wind vectors every 5 seconds. The operators could see the tanker's silhouette glowing in infrared, a perfect wall behind which to hide. At that distance, even the best radar in the world can't see below the horizon, one NATO electronic warfare expert explained to BBC News. They turned Earth's curvature into camouflage. At 1:43 a.m., the Russian radar officer logged 4 successful kills, typing rapidly into his console. The satisfaction was short-lived. In the next frame, his screen erupted with new contacts appearing inside the defensive perimeter, an impossibility that defied training manuals. These weren't echoes or debris. They were moving targets coming from within the shadow of the supertanker itself. His headset filled with confusion and rising panic. The unthinkable had happened. The hunter had become the hunted. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian commander's voice finally broke radio silence. Phase 2. Confirmed. Across the bunker, operators exhaled, but only briefly. This was the moment when theory collided with reality. One minor miscalculation, a sudden gust or a stray reflection, could expose the entire assault. New intelligence later revealed that the operation used AQ-400 reconnaissance drones as navigational sentinels hovering miles behind the attack formation to correct drift and maintain cohesion. But even as the swarm approached, strike distance danger loomed above. Satellite feeds from Western allies had detected the activation of Russia's Beriev A-50 early warning aircraft circling high over the Black Sea. The clock was ticking toward exposure. Down below, the attack drones locked into a synchronized pattern, their onboard computers calculating final approach angles. Each had one mission: to turn a billion-dollar tanker into a geopolitical earthquake. As energy analysts at Reuters would later report, destroying Feodosia's oil hub would cripple the logistics feeding the southern Russian front, halving its supply within hours. The economic ripple could reach as far as Novorossiysk and Rostov-on-Don, triggering emergency rationing. At 1:44 a.m., the leading drone adjusted altitude 10 meters, then 8. Its AI confirmed radar shadow integrity. Inside the bunker, someone whispered, "Perfect coverage." But no one noticed the wind data spiking red on the auxiliary monitor. A pressure surge, invisible but deadly, was rolling in from the east, a threat not of metal or missile, but of nature itself. As the screen flickered and the telemetry graphs began to drift, one question haunted every operator in that darkened room: would human precision or artificial intelligence decide the fate of Feodosia's sky? At 1:45 a.m., chaos struck like an invisible hammer. A violent 28-mile-per-hour gust roared over the Black Sea, scattering the drone formation that had moments earlier moved with machine-like precision. On the monitors inside Ukraine's underground command center, the once straight telemetry lines dissolved into a storm of red error codes. Operators cursed under their breath. This wasn't electronic warfare or Russian interference. It was the oldest enemy of flight wind. In an instant, months of planning teetered on collapse. The lead drone spun 30 degrees off course, dragging the rest of the swarm into turbulence. According to BBC defense correspondent Paul Adams, the Black Sea's unpredictable weather has repeatedly derailed both Russian and Ukrainian drone missions, but never at such a critical juncture. Yet what made this moment even more perilous was timing. The Russian fuel terminal had just begun pumping operations. Thousands of gallons of fuel were now flowing between the tanker and shore facilities, transforming the target zone into a massive volatile cloud of vapor. Inside the bunker, the Ukrainian commander call sign, Nomad, faced an impossible choice. Strike now, and the detonation would create a single apocalyptic blast, blinding their remaining drones and possibly neutralizing their chance to destroy the entire terminal. Wait too long, and the Russians would regroup and strike back. Every second was a death sentence for someone, either the mission or the men controlling it. According to Defense News analysis published later that week, this precise moment demonstrated Ukraine's growing reliance on AI-assisted command systems like Velis, designed to calculate options faster than human reflexes. Nomad issued the order, "Activate Velis. Retask targets." The computers obeyed instantly. Within seconds, the scattered swarm reorganized itself, abandoning the tanker as the primary target and redirecting to the pumping stations that kept the fuel flowing. It was a choice of surgical efficiency over spectacle. Western experts compared the maneuver to a chess master sacrificing a queen to win the board. It was an act of brutal logic, noted The Guardian's military analyst, choosing smaller explosions to achieve greater paralysis. By targeting the pumps first, Ukraine neutralized the imminent risk of a firestorm while still ensuring a strategic kill. Meanwhile, Russian radar operators were celebrating prematurely. On their screens, the decoys had vanished, and the strike signatures had seemingly dispersed. They believed the storm had saved them, but the reality was far more complex. As DW News later confirmed, the Velis AI had used the weather to its advantage, performing what pilots call a beam maneuver, turning perpendicular to the radar's line of sight. The result, their relative speed to radar dropped to nearly zero, rendering them ghosts to Russian Doppler filters. The human operators back in Feodosia didn't understand why their systems suddenly went silent. Then the AWACS alarm blared. Russia's A-50 early warning aircraft orbiting 10 kilometers above the Black Sea had picked up faint infrared traces, the heat of electric motors glowing like embers in the night. The drones might have hidden from radar, but not from heat. This was the Achilles heel of electric warfare, observed a Reuters defense columnist. Thermal sensors see truth when all else is deception. Nomad's team now watched in tense silence as a warning appeared across all terminals. SAM launch detected. Somewhere on the Crimean coast, a S-400 Triumph missile was already screaming toward the sea, locked on by data relayed from the A-50's eye in the sky. The operators had 8 seconds before impact, too little time to dodge, too much to surrender. What came next would redefine the battlefield use of drones. In that instant, the Ukrainian operator's fingers moved calmly across his console. He entered a single code, deploy ALE-50. From the back of the lead drone, a tiny pod ejected and uncoiled a fiber optic tether, radiating heat at 800 degrees Fahrenheit, twice the signature of the drone's own motor. It was a digital matador's cape screaming, "I am the target." On Russian screens, the missile's lock shifted violently. The S-400 dived at full speed, not toward the drones, but the decoy. A silent flash erupted above the water as the missile detonated harmlessly. Inside the bunker, the Ukrainians didn't cheer. They were already scanning for the next threat, their breaths heavy, their hands trembling. The reprieve was temporary. The Velis AI had just identified the missile's launch coordinates, a coastal S-400 battery west of Feodosia. Now Ukraine had a new target. Would they risk everything to strike back before the Russians could reload? At 1:46 a.m., the Black Sea sky above Crimea turned into a deadly contest between algorithm and instinct. The Russian A-50 AWACS, circling like a metal vulture at 33,000 feet, had become the all-seeing eye of Moscow's southern defense line. From that height, its Shmel-M radar could track any aircraft-sized object within 600 kilometers, and yet what it now saw on its screen defied expectation. Heat signatures were flickering in and out like ghosts darting across the radar map and vanishing again. "They're not running," one Russian technician muttered. "They're thinking." The Velis AI, activated minutes earlier by the Ukrainian commander Nomad, was rewriting the rules of drone warfare in real time. Rather than trying to outrun the S-400 missiles streaking toward them, the AI had calculated a counterpunch. It cross-referenced missile trajectory weather data and radar latency, then sent encrypted coordinates back to a reserve group of drones holding 40 miles offshore, a hidden strike cell built specifically for contingencies. This was a digital ambush within a physical ambush, later observed Defense News. Meanwhile, inside the Russian command post in Feodosia, panic replaced confidence. Operators were shouting over each other as new thermal signatures appeared inside their perimeter. They had been blinded not by jamming, but by data overload. NATO analysts in Brussels, watching live satellite intercepts, described the scene as organized chaos, one side, improvising through AI, the other drowning in its own complexity. By 1:47 a.m., the Ukrainian drones that had survived the S-400 near miss began transmitting new telemetry. Their batteries were dangerously low, but Velis had rerouted energy consumption by deactivating redundant sensors, allowing another 4 minutes of operational time, just enough to retaliate. From a tactical perspective, the mission should have ended there. But Kyiv had no intention of retreating. As BBC News reported, the attack wasn't just a strike. It was a proof of concept for NATO-backed AI-driven swarm warfare, tested for the first time in real combat conditions. High above the battlefield, the A-50's commander gave the next order: target illumination continuous. Feed data to the S-400 battery. On the ground, another missile roared to life, slicing through the darkness at Mach 4. But this time, the Ukrainian AI had already anticipated it. A secondary swarm of Velis-linked decoys, previously dormant, powered on and began emitting random heat bursts in a 10-kilometer radius, a chaotic web of thermal confusion. According to DW's military desk, this created a mirror storm of false targets that overwhelmed the missile's guidance system, forcing it to spiral into the sea. Within minutes, the tables turned. Using the coordinates transmitted during the previous interception, 3 attack drones armed with PG-7V warheads broke formation and accelerated toward the S-400 site itself. The Russian operators at the coastal battery never saw them coming. Surveillance satellites later showed 3 successive explosions ripping through the launch zone, each one a precise hit. A Reuters analysis estimated that the destroyed battery represented over $200 million in hardware, the cost of a single night's miscalculation. Across social media and early morning newscasts, footage from the strike began to circulate by dawn, fiery columns rising over Crimea, accompanied by unverified audio of Russian soldiers shouting, "We're blind." Western outlets seized the narrative. AI versus air defense read a headline in the New York Times calling the Feodosia battle the first real test of autonomy in modern warfare. Yet in Kiev's underground bunker, celebration was short-lived. The drones had completed their retaliation, but the main mission remained destroying the Feodosia oil terminal itself. Time was running out. Their batteries were minutes from depletion, and the tanker continued to pump volatile fuel. Every variable from the next wind shift to a single radar blip could doom the operation. And as dawn's first light began to touch the Crimean horizon, one voice in the bunker whispered what everyone already feared: the sky belongs to no one now, only to whoever calculates faster. But Nomad wasn't ready to surrender. With the S-400 site burning and the AWACS momentarily disoriented, he gave a final order: engage primary target. Would this final strike deliver the decisive blow or ignite a catastrophe that consumed them all? At 1:48 a.m., the calm surface of Feodosia Bay transformed into a mirror of fire. The lead Ukrainian drone, its AI guidance synchronized to the last remaining data packets from VelisNet 2.0, dived toward the terminal's main pumping station. A small 2.6 kilogram PG-7V warhead nestled in its carbon shell was more than just an explosive. It was a scalpel designed for precision destruction. The impact was almost surgical. A single flash, a split-second delay, and then a shockwave tore through the concrete housing of the pump line. On satellite infrared feeds from Defense News and Reuters, the blast appeared as a sharp thermal bloom, the unmistakable sign of a direct hit. The explosion did not level the entire terminal. It cut it open like slicing an artery. Fuel under pressure burst from the ruptured pipes, spraying diesel in a glittering mist that hung over the docks like a toxic fog. You could see the fire breathing, a NATO logistics analyst later said. The terminal wasn't just burning, it was bleeding. Seconds later, the second drone dove into that vapor cloud. Its purpose was not to destroy, but to ignite. When its charge connected the atmosphere itself, combusted. The result was not a simple fire, but a thermobaric eruption, a phenomenon in which atomized fuel mixes with oxygen before detonation, producing temperatures above 2,000 degrees Celsius. For 3 full seconds, Feodosia's sky turned white. From the nearby coast, witnesses described the shockwave as like an earthquake followed by thunder. Within moments, secondary explosions rippled across the terminal. Fuel tanks ruptured in succession, sending columns of flame spiraling hundreds of meters high. The tanker itself, once the operation's shield, became a colossal bomb. Its 1.1 million barrels of crude oil ignited in a chain reaction that lit the night sky from Sevastopol to Kerch. Western satellites, including U.S. NOAA thermal monitors, recorded the heat signature as one of the brightest non-nuclear events in the region's modern history. The European Space Agency's Sentinel-3 sensors later confirmed a visible fire radius of nearly 10 kilometers. It was an energy disaster visible from orbit, reported The Guardian. For Moscow, the loss was catastrophic. The Feodosia terminal supplied over half the fuel for Russia's southern operations, from tank columns near Tokmak to naval outposts in Sevastopol. Destroying it didn't just cripple supply lines, it paralyzed movement. Within hours, emergency communications between the Black Sea Fleet and Logistics Command in Rostov went silent. By sunrise, drone imagery confirmed what analysts called the largest single economic strike of the war. Meanwhile, in Washington, President Donald Trump was briefed in the early hours. According to Al Jazeera's White House correspondent, Trump described the incident as a wake-up call for Russian overconfidence, while NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg convened an emergency call with defense ministers to assess escalation risks. Though the alliance officially denied direct involvement, military observers noted that the strike's algorithmic precision and tactical adaptation bore clear hallmarks of NATO-style operational doctrine. In Brussels, debates erupted over whether Ukraine's growing reliance on autonomous systems marked a new phase of warfare. This is algorithmic deterrence, explained DW's defense analyst Martin Heller. A nation with fewer jets and missiles uses intelligence, literal artificial intelligence, to neutralize billion-dollar defenses. But amid the strategic brilliance lay human cost. Footage verified by BBC Verify showed Russian rescue teams battling an inferno that refused to die. Black smoke rose in massive columns, forming what locals called a dark mountain on the horizon. The plume was visible from 25 miles away, contaminating the air and sea for days. As dawn broke over Crimea, satellite feeds showed the last remaining drones circling in a holding pattern, their mission complete, but their energy fading fast. One by one, their signals blinked out. The bay continued to burn a new sun born of oil and vengeance. And as Kiev's command bunker fell silent, a single question lingered on every analyst's mind. Had Ukraine just redefined the meaning of a strategic victory, or opened a new chapter of uncontrollable escalation? By sunrise on October 6, 2025, smoke still coiled skyward from the ruins of the Feodosia terminal, a black monument to a night that had redrawn the energy map of southern Russia. Satellite photos from Reuters and DW revealed a coastline scorched for kilometers, pipelines twisted like molten vines, tanker hulls reduced to charred skeletons. For Ukraine, this was not just a military triumph. It was an economic earthquake that rippled far beyond the battlefield. Within 72 hours, Russia's southern logistics began to unravel. Fuel deliveries to Crimea and the occupied Kherson front dropped by more than half. Tank convoys stalled on the steppe, their engines cold and silent. Entire brigades became static fortresses overnight, reported BBC's Moscow bureau, citing intercepted Russian communications. The Guardian confirmed that at least 14% of gas stations in southern Russia began limiting civilian sales as the military diverted every available liter. The shock reverberated through the Kremlin. According to Al Jazeera's investigative unit, emergency meetings were held in Moscow's defense ministry. President Vladimir Putin reportedly demanded explanations from his generals. How could the most fortified port in Crimea be destroyed by machines the size of suitcases? Analysts across the West called it the Black Sea's Pearl Harbor moment, a blow not in scale, but in symbolism. The immediate consequence was a logistical paralysis. Supply trucks stopped moving. Ammunition stockpiles near Melitopol ran dry. Artillery units still armed but stranded became easy prey for Ukrainian reconnaissance. The domino effect was brutal, noted Defense News. Without fuel, mobility vanished. Without mobility, defense became fiction. NATO intelligence reports later described a 72-hour window of total Russian vulnerability, one that Ukraine exploited ruthlessly with follow-up drone strikes on smaller depots from Kerch to Jankoy. Yet the collapse was not only material. Inside Russia's military hierarchy, trust eroded. Officers feared using centralized air defense networks after Feodosia's failure exposed their vulnerabilities. Western cyber experts suggested that paranoia spread faster than the flames. They stopped believing their own radars, said a NATO electronic warfare advisor quoted by NYT. And when you stop believing your instruments, you stop acting decisively. The broader geopolitical implications came swiftly. Oil markets trembled as Brent crude prices surged nearly 6% in 2 days, the sharpest spike since 2022. Global investors scrambled to recalculate supply routes, while Western governments quietly celebrated what some termed a turning point of attrition. In Washington, President Donald Trump addressed the situation, cautiously stating that Ukraine's resilience is reshaping deterrence in real time, while insisting that NATO remains a defensive alliance observing events closely. At the same time, experts warned of escalation. DW reported Russian discussions about deploying Kinzhal hypersonic missiles as deterrence tools, while military bloggers on Telegram demanded retaliation deep inside Ukrainian industrial zones. European analysts debated whether such rhetoric signaled desperation or preparation. As The Guardian put it, Feodosia may not end the war, but it has changed its gravity from territory to technology. In Kyiv, however, the mood was colder, almost clinical. Commanders saw the Feodosia strike not as victory, but as proof of feasibility. Every drone launched that night was expendable, said a Ukrainian officer interviewed by BBC News. But every gallon of fuel we denied Russia was priceless. By week's end, the smoke over the Black Sea had thinned, but the shockwaves continued to spread through supply chains, politics, and psychology. For the first time in the war, Russia's dominance in logistics had been decisively shattered, not by massed firepower, but by algorithms' timing and audacity. And as Western observers watched satellite footage of the still smoldering coastline, one haunting question began circulating in defense circles from Brussels to Washington. If AI-driven warfare can drain a nation's fuel without a single human pilot in harm's way, what happens when both sides master